I represented myself in court and my husband laughed. "You are too poor to hire a lawyer," he said, adjusting the lapel of his $5,000 Armani suit. Everyone in the courtroom agreed with him. The judge looked down at me with pity in his eyes. His high-priced lawyer smirked, already counting his victory bonus. I stood up and smoothed my skirt. I started speaking. After my first sentence, the courtroom froze. "Your Honor," I said, keeping my voice level and cold, "I am not representing myself because I am too poor to hire an attorney. I am representing myself because there is not a single lawyer in the state of New York who understands the complex money laundering scheme my husband has been running better than I do. But to understand why the color drained from Brad's face in that moment, we have to go back exactly 14 days. It started at Le Bernardin. Brad had insisted we celebrate our 5th anniversary there. I should have known something was wrong when he ordered the most expensive bottle of vintage red wine on the list without even asking me. He sat across from me, looking every bit the successful venture capitalist he claimed to be. He was handsome, in that polished, superficial way that used to charm me, but now just looked like a mask. "Audrey, we need to talk," he said, not even waiting for the appetizers to arrive. I looked at him expecting a toast. Instead, he slid a thick manila envelope across the pristine white tablecloth. "I am filing for divorce." I stared at the envelope. The noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away. "Excuse me?" I whispered. "I have outgrown you, Audrey," he said, taking a sip of his wine as if commenting on the weather. "Look at us. I am building an empire. My firm just closed a $12 million deal. I am moving in circles you cannot even comprehend. And you are still doing data entry at that little consulting firm. You are stagnant. You are boring." I felt a laugh bubbling up in my throat, but I suppressed it. Data entry. That is what I had let him believe for 5 years. He thought I spent my days typing numbers into spreadsheets for small businesses. He had no idea that my little consulting firm was a private contractor for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He did not know that my boring job involved forensic accounting for high-level financial crimes. Just yesterday, I had spent 6 hours tracing wire transfers for a suspected human trafficking ring. But to Brad, I was just a mousy wife with a dead-end job. He tapped the envelope. "I have had my lawyer draw up a fair settlement. Since we signed a prenup and since my assets were acquired through my business acumen, you get what you came in with. Which is essentially nothing. You move out of the penthouse by the 1st of the month." I opened the envelope. The numbers were laughable. He was offering me $5,000 as a moving stipend. $5,000 for 5 years of marriage. "Is this a joke, Brad?" I asked. "Do not make this difficult," he snapped, his charm vanishing. "I have met someone else, someone who matches my ambition. Jessica is the daughter of my lead investor. She understands the lifestyle. She is young, vibrant, and she does not smell like that old dog of yours." He was talking about Barnaby, my 12-year-old golden retriever. Barnaby was the only pure thing in this entire marriage. I closed the folder. "So that is it. You are trading me in for a newer model and leaving me homeless. I am being generous," he said, checking his watch. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have a meeting. Enjoy the dinner. I already paid the bill." He stood up and walked out, leaving me alone at a table for 2. I sat there for 20 minutes processing the betrayal. It wasn't the divorce that hurt. Honestly, I had felt the distance for years. It was the cruelty, the absolute dismissal of my worth. I signaled the waiter and asked for the check just to be sure. He told me it was taken care of. I walked out into the cool Manhattan air, feeling a strange sense of calm settling over me. I needed to get home to Barnaby. I stopped at the pharmacy on the way back. Barnaby needed his hip medication, and we were out of his special prescription food. I carried the heavy bag to the counter and swiped our joint credit card. Declined. I looked at the cashier, confused. "Try it again, please." She swiped it again. Declined. "It says reported lost or stolen, ma'am." I pulled out my phone and checked the banking app. Locked. Every single joint account, checking savings credit, all locked or drained. My personal account, which I kept small for daily expenses, had been linked to the main overdraft, and that was frozen too. My phone pinged with a text from Brad. "Since you are independent now, I removed your access. Use your own salary to feed that mutt." Welcome to the real world, Audrey. I stood in the pharmacy, my hands shaking. It wasn't fear. It was rage, cold, hard rage. He knew I didn't get paid until next week. He knew Barnaby needed those meds tonight. He was trying to starve me out. He was trying to break me before the legal battle even started. I paid with the emergency cash I kept hidden in my phone case. It was barely enough. I walked the 10 blocks home, the heavy bag of dog food cutting into my shoulder, plotting every single step of his destruction. He thought money was his weapon. He didn't realize he had just declared war on a woman who could weaponize a decimal point. I arrived at our building, the Sterling Heights. The doorman, who usually greeted me with a smile, looked away awkwardly. Brad had probably already told them I was being kicked out. I took the elevator up to the penthouse, preparing myself to pack a bag and leave for a hotel. But when I opened the door, I realized the war had already invaded my sanctuary. The apartment was in chaos, and standing in the middle of the living room was Patricia, Brad's mother. She was holding a roll of neon green painter's tape. She was moving from object to object, slapping a piece of tape on everything she touched. The sofa, tape. The television, tape. My grand piano, tape. "Patricia, what are you doing?" I asked, dropping the dog food on the floor. Barnaby trotted over to me, whimpering. I knelt down to comfort him, seeing the fear in his cloudy eyes. "Oh, you are finally back," Patricia said, not even looking at me. She slapped a piece of tape on a crystal vase. "I am cataloging Brad's assets before you try to steal anything. My son told me you might try to loot the place. We have to protect the family legacy." She walked over to the mantelpiece. My breath hitched. She was reaching for the antique mahogany clock. It wasn't valuable to them, but it was the last thing my grandmother gave me before she died. It had been in my family for 3 generations. "Don't touch that," I said, my voice low. Patricia scoffed. This fits perfectly with the decor in my guest house. Brad paid for the insurance on this apartment, which means everything inside belongs to him. That is how the law works, dear. Maybe if you had a real job, you would understand property rights. She ripped off a piece of green tape and stuck it right on the delicate wood face of the clock. I didn't scream. I didn't lunge at her. I pulled out my phone. I opened the camera app and started recording. "What are you doing?" "Put that away," Patricia snapped. "I am documenting the inventory process, Patricia," I said calmly. "Please continue. Tell me again how my grandmother's clock belongs to your son." She narrowed her eyes, her face twisting into a sneer. "You are pathetic, a little gold digger trying to scrape up crumbs. You should be grateful Brad kept you around this long. You are nothing without him. You are just a parasite." She turned her back to me and marched toward the study. My heart stopped. The study was where I kept my personal safe. It didn't have money in it, but it had my work laptop, my encrypted drives, files that contained sensitive FBI data that Brad absolutely could not see. I followed her. She was standing in front of the wall safe, punching in numbers. Brad's birthday. Failed. Her birthday. Failed. "You changed the code," she muttered angrily. "Open this. Brad says you are hiding cash in here, stolen cash from the household budget." I leaned against the doorframe, still recording. "That is a federal crime, Patricia. Trying to access a secure device that doesn't belong to you." She laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "I am his mother. I have power of attorney. Open it or I will call the police and tell them you attacked me." She picked up a heavy brass letter opener from the desk and brandished it not at me but at the keypad, as if she could pry it open. I zoomed in on the letter opener in her hand, then panned up to her face. "Go ahead, Patricia. Call them. I would love to explain to the officers why you are breaking into a safe in a home where I am still a legal resident." She slammed the letter opener down, scratching the mahogany desk. "You will regret this. We will crush you in court. Stanford is the best lawyer in the city. He will strip you bare. You will be on the street with that dying dog within a week." She stormed out of the room, bumping my shoulder hard as she passed. I heard the front door slam moments later. Only then did I let my hand drop. My pulse was racing. They were coming for everything. They weren't just ending a marriage. They were trying to erase me. They wanted to leave me with 0 dignity, 0 assets, and 0 history. I walked over to the safe and entered the complex biometric sequence. The heavy door clicked open. My drives were safe. I sat down in the leather chair, the one Brad forbade me from sitting in because he said it was for executives only. I pulled out my laptop and booted it up. The screen glowed with the familiar secure login of my analysis software. If they wanted a war about assets, I would give them one. But I wasn't going to fight for the toaster or the sofa. I was going for the jugular. I opened a new case file. Subject Bradley Sterling, Sterling Venture Capital. I started typing. I didn't need his passwords. I knew his patterns. I knew he used the same variation of his first car and his high school football jersey number for everything. But he was smarter than that with the big money. Or so he thought. For hours I dug. I bypassed his surface-level accounts, the ones he had locked me out of. Those were decoys. I went deeper. I looked for the holes in the data, the missing sequences and invoice numbers, the consulting fees paid to companies that didn't have websites. It was 3:00 a.m. when I found it. A recurring transfer of $45,000 a month to a shell company in the Cayman Islands called Blue Horizon Consulting. It looked like a standard vendor payment, but when I cross-referenced the IP address used to access the Blue Horizon account, it traced back to a server located in a residential address in the Hamptons, my in-laws' summer house. But that wasn't the smoking gun. That was just sloppy. I needed to know where the money went after the Caymans. I ran a packet sniffer program I had designed myself, an algorithm that hunted for digital crumbs left behind by swift transfers. It took 20 minutes. I sat in the dark Barnaby, sleeping at my feet, watching the progress bar. Ding! A notification popped up on my screen. It was an email alert from a secure server I had set up years ago to monitor global banking anomalies. Match found. Account holder B. Sterling, institution UBS Zurich, balance $4.2 million. I stared at the screen. $4.2 million. Hidden. Undeclared. And based on the transfer dates, he had started funneling this money 6 months before we even got married. But then I saw the second notification, the one that made my blood run cold and then boil over. Attached to the Swiss account was a secondary beneficiary card, a card that had been used just 3 hours ago to purchase a diamond necklace at Tiffany's in Soho. The name on the secondary card was not Jessica. It was not his mother. The name on the card was Nia Sterling, my sister-in-law, the woman who had always been kind to me, the only person in this family who treated me like a human being, the wife of Brad's brother. Why would Brad give his brother's wife access to his secret slush fund? The puzzle pieces shifted in my head. This wasn't just hidden assets. This was leverage. This was blackmail. Or maybe it was a partnership. I sat back, the blue light of the screen illuminating my face. Brad thought he had locked me out of the grocery money. He thought I was crying in the dark. He had no idea that I had just found the key to his entire kingdom, and I found a crack in the family armor that I could pry open wide enough to bring the whole house down. I picked up my phone. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't call my parents. I opened my secure email and composed a message to the one person who could verify what I was seeing. To Senior Agent Miller, FBI, Financial Crimes Division. Subject potential RICO predicate at Sterling VC. Body, I have something. It is big, and I am going to need a subpoena. I hit send. I looked down at Barnaby. He was snoring softly. Don't worry, buddy, I whispered. We are going to get you the best food money can buy, and your daddy is going to pay for it. I closed the laptop. The sun was starting to rise over the city. The skyline looked beautiful, sharp and jagged like broken glass. I was ready for court. I was ready for the insults. I was ready for the lies. Because I had the one thing they didn't. I had the receipts. The silence in the courtroom following my opening statement was heavy, the kind of silence that usually precedes a natural disaster. Brad sat frozen in his chair, his mouth slightly open, the confident smirk he had worn just seconds ago replaced by a look of confusion. But his lawyer Stanford was a professional shark. He did not freeze for long. He adjusted his silk tie and stood up, letting out a condescending sigh that echoed off the mahogany walls. Your Honor! Stanford boomed, his voice dripping with false patience. I must object to this theatrics. Mrs. Sterling is clearly distraught. She is emotional. We understand that divorce is difficult for a woman in her position, especially one with limited professional exposure to the complexities of finance. However, allowing her to represent herself is not only a waste of this court's valuable time, but a disservice to the proceedings. I move that the court appoint a guardian ad litem or require Mrs. Sterling to retain proper counsel before we proceed. She clearly does not understand the difference between a checking account and money laundering. He looked back at me with a pitying smile, the kind you give a child who has just spilled milk. Brad chuckled nervously, regaining some of his composure. "Yeah," Brad whispered loud enough for the stenographer to hear. "She is just confused, Judge. She spends her days filing invoices. She doesn't know what she is talking about." The judge, a gray-haired man named Justice O'Connor, looked over his spectacles at me. He seemed tired. He had probably seen 1,000 bitter divorces where one spouse accused the other of hiding money. Mrs. Sterling, the judge, said, his tone weary. "Mr. Stanford makes a valid point. Financial litigation is highly technical. If you are unable to afford counsel, we can discuss options. But proceeding pro se in a case involving significant assets is risky. Are you sure you wish to continue?" I did not look at Stanford. I did not look at Brad. I kept my eyes locked on the judge. "I am quite sure, Your Honor," I said, my voice steady. "And regarding Mr. Stanford's concern for my professional exposure, I believe Exhibit A will clarify my competence." I bent down and picked up the heavy black binder I had placed under the plaintiff's table. It was 3 inches thick, filled with 200 pages of spreadsheets, bank authorizations, and corporate registry filings. I walked toward the bench. The sound of my heels clicking on the hardwood floor was the only noise in the room. I placed the binder on the judge's desk. It landed with a heavy, authoritative thud that made Brad flinch. I handed a duplicate copy to Stanford. He took it with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. "What is this?" Stanford asked, flipping open the cover. "That," I said, turning to face the courtroom, "is a detailed map of the Sterling Venture Capital Shadow Network. Specifically, it is a list of 14 limited liability companies registered in the state of Delaware over the last 36 months. Stanford laughed. "Owning companies is not a crime, Mrs. Sterling. It is called business. It is a crime when the companies have no employees, no products, no physical offices, and no revenue, yet manage to generate $3 million in tax-deductible losses annually," I replied. I pointed to the binder in the judge's hand. "If you will turn to page 4, Your Honor, you will see a company called Greenleaf Holdings. It lists a CEO and a registered agent. The CEO is listed as a Mr. Alejandro Santiago." The judge adjusted his glasses, reading the page. I continued, "Mr. Santiago is a hard-working man. He is 62 years old. He does not have a finance degree. In fact, Mr. Santiago is the gardener who mows the lawn at my in-laws' estate in the Hamptons every Tuesday. I spoke with Mr. Santiago yesterday. He was quite surprised to learn that he is the CEO of a multi-million-dollar investment firm. He was also surprised to learn that his identity was used to sign tax returns, claiming $700,000 in consulting losses last year." The courtroom was dead silent now. Brad's face had gone from pale to a sick shade of gray. He grabbed Stanford's arm, whispering frantically. Stanford pulled his arm away, his eyes scanning the page rapidly. I didn't stop. I walked back to my table and picked up a single sheet of paper. According to the Internal Revenue Code, specifically the Economic Substance Doctrine codified in Section 7701, a transaction must have a substantial purpose aside from reducing tax liability. Brad created these 14 companies for one purpose only: to manufacture fake losses. He takes the legitimate income from his firm, funnels it into these shell companies as consulting fees, and then writes it off. He effectively pays 0% in federal income tax while buying Ferraris and diamonds. I looked directly at Brad. He calls it business, Your Honor. The IRS calls it tax evasion. And since I filed joint tax returns with him for 5 years under the assumption that his filings were legal, I am technically liable. That is why I am representing myself, because I am the only one in this room who knows where the bodies are buried, and I am the only one interested in digging them up to clear my name. Stanford slammed the binder shut. "Objection. This is speculation. These documents are unverified. We have not had time to review this ambush." The judge held up his hand, silencing Stanford. He looked at the documents again, then at Brad, who was now sweating profusely in his $5,000 suit. "Mr. Stanford," the judge said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. These look like certified filings from the Delaware Secretary of State. And this bank statement bears a stamp from UBS Zurich. Are you telling me your client denies the existence of these entities? Stanford stammered. We reserve the right to review the materials, Your Honor. My client has complex business dealings. It is possible Mrs. Sterling has misinterpreted the corporate structure. The judge looked at me. There was no pity in his eyes anymore. There was respect and a hint of anticipation. The court accepts the plaintiff's Exhibit A into evidence, the judge ruled. Mr. Stanford, I suggest you take a very close look at these documents. If what Mrs. Sterling says about this gardener is true, we are going to have a very long, very interesting trial. I sat back down. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just opened my own copy of the binder to page 5. We are just getting started, Your Honor, I said. Now let's discuss the $14 million missing from the Sterling Family Trust. The judge granted a 48-hour recess to review the mountains of evidence I had dropped on his desk. Brad stormed out of the courtroom without looking at me. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He didn't say a word, but I knew the retaliation was coming. I just didn't expect it to be so petty or so immediate. I got back to the penthouse around 6 in the evening. Barnaby greeted me at the door, his tail wagging slowly. I bent down to pet him, and that is when I noticed the silence. The hum of the refrigerator was gone. The air conditioning, usually a constant whisper in the luxury apartment, was dead silent. I flipped the light switch in the hallway. Nothing. I walked into the kitchen and turned the faucet. A few drops of water sputtered out, and then nothing. Dry. I pulled out my phone. No Wi-Fi signal. My phone buzzed with a text from Brad. Since you are so good at finding hidden assets, go find your own electricity. I canceled the utilities. They are in my name. Have fun in the dark. I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I simply walked to my emergency bag, the one I kept packed for last-minute work trips, and pulled out 2 heavy-duty camping lanterns. I lit them, casting a soft, eerie glow over the marble countertops. Then I pulled out my encrypted 5G hotspot dongle. Brad could cut the domestic line, but he couldn't cut my connection to the outside world. I fed Barnaby using bottled water I had stored in the pantry. Then I sat down to wait. I knew this wasn't the end of it. Cutting the power was just the opening move. Brad was a bully, and bullies always need an audience. At 2:15 in the morning, the front door crashed open. I was sitting at the kitchen island, wearing my noise-canceling headphones, typing away on my laptop. The sudden vibration of the floor was the only thing that alerted me. Brad stumbled in, loud and drunk. But he wasn't alone. Behind him was an entourage of about 10 people. I recognized a few of them. His frat brothers from college, who never grew up, a couple of junior analysts from his firm, who worshipped the ground he walked on, and her, Jessica. She walked into my home like she owned it. She was wearing a silver sequined mini dress that caught the light of my camping lanterns. She looked around the darkened apartment and laughed. "Oh my God, Brad!" She squealed, her voice high and piercing even through my headphones. "It is like a cave in here. Is she actually living like this?" Brad wrapped an arm around her waist. "She is a survivor, babe. Aren't you, Audrey? Look at her, sitting there like a gargoyle." He flipped a switch on a portable boombox one of his friends had carried in. Heavy bass started thumping, shaking the crystal glasses in the cabinets. They had brought coolers of beer and bottles of expensive vodka. "Ignore her, everyone," Brad shouted, popping a champagne cork that flew across the room and hit the refrigerator. "This is a celebration to freedom and to trading up." His friends cheered. They started setting up a beer pong table on the antique dining table my mother had refinished by hand. Someone spilled a red Solo cup on the Persian rug. I didn't move. I didn't take off my headphones. I didn't look at them with anger. I looked at them with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing lab rats. Jessica walked over to the kitchen island. She hopped up and sat on the counter right next to my laptop. She swung her legs, her heels clicking against the cabinetry. "You know you are really ruining the vibe," she said, leaning in close to my face. Her breath smelled of peppermint schnapps. "Why don't you just leave? Brad doesn't want you. Nobody wants you. You are just embarrassing yourself." I continued typing. I didn't even blink. She reached out and slammed my laptop lid shut. "I am talking to you," she screamed. I slowly opened the lid again. I looked her dead in the eye, adjusted my glasses, and resumed typing. She huffed, jumped off the counter, and ran back to Brad. "Brad, make her leave. She is being creepy." Brad stumbled over, his eyes glassy. He grabbed a bottle of tequila from the counter. "Let her stay, Jess. Let her watch. Let her see what a real life looks like." He turned to his friends. "All right, boys, let's take this up a notch. Who wants to go skiing?" A cheer went up from the group. I knew exactly what that code word meant. They gathered around the coffee table in the living room. It was dark, illuminated only by the streetlights filtering in through the floor-to-ceiling windows and the glow of my lanterns. Brad thought the darkness was his ally. He thought that because he had cut the power, the security cameras were dead. He was an idiot. The Sterling Heights penthouse was equipped with a state-of-the-art smart home system. While the main power was cut, the security system had a 48-hour battery backup located in a concealed panel in the utility closet. And Brad, in his infinite arrogance, had never changed the factory admin password because he said it was too complicated to remember. I typed in the IP address, 192.168.1.1, admin login, password admin, access granted. On my screen, a grid of 12 camera feeds popped up. The infrared night vision mode was crystal clear. It turned the pitch-black living room into a bright greenish-gray stage. I maximized the camera feed for the living room. There was Brad sitting on the sofa. There was Jessica kneeling on the coffee table. And there, laid out in neat white lines on the glass surface, was a significant amount of cocaine. I hit the record button. I watched on my screen as Brad leaned down. I watched as he inhaled. I watched as he passed the rolled-up $100 bill to Jessica. I watched as his junior analysts took their turns. The resolution was 4K. I could see the sweat on Brad's forehead. I could see the serial number on the bill they were using. Brad stood up, wiping his nose, and shouted something at me. I couldn't hear him over the music and my noise-canceling headphones, but I saw him point a finger at me and laugh. He grabbed Jessica and pulled her into a kiss right there in the living room of the home I had cleaned, decorated, and maintained for 5 years. He thought he was winning. He thought he was humiliating me by partying in my face while I sat in the dark. I checked the recording status. Capture complete, uploading to secure cloud. I also took a screenshot. I opened a new email draft. To Child Protective Services, subject unsafe environment for visitation. Brad didn't have kids yet, but his sister Bethany did, and she often left her toddler here on weekends. This evidence would ensure Brad never got within 50 feet of a minor again. I also forwarded the video to a separate folder labeled Leverage. The party raged on until 4 in the morning. Eventually, they passed out. Brad and Jessica collapsed on the expensive Italian leather sofa. His friends were scattered on the floor. I stood up. I walked quietly to the living room. I stepped over a sleeping frat boy. I retrieved the camping lanterns, extinguishing them one by one. Then I went to the bedroom, locked the door, and went to sleep. I needed my rest. Tomorrow was going to be a very busy day for the repo man. The morning sun hit the penthouse windows with brutal intensity. I woke up at 7 sharp, refreshed and ready. I dressed in my best navy blue suit. I could hear groans coming from the living room. The hangover was setting in. I walked into the kitchen and started making coffee using my French press and the gas stove, which still worked since it wasn't electric. The smell of rich, dark roast began to fill the apartment. Brad stumbled into the kitchen wearing only his boxers. He looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot, his skin pale. He squinted at me. "Is that coffee?" he croaked. "Give me some." I poured a steaming mug. I took a slow, deliberate sip. "No," I said. "This coffee was bought with my own funds." He swore under his breath and went to the sink to get water. He turned the tap. Nothing. He had forgotten he cut the water. He kicked the cabinet in frustration. "Whatever. I am going to the gym. I need to sweat this out." He grabbed his keys from the counter and stormed out to the private elevator that led to the garage. I waited. I counted down in my head. 10, 9, 8. A muffled scream echoed up the elevator shaft. 2 minutes later, Brad burst back into the apartment. He was purple with rage. "Where is it?" he screamed. "Where is my car?" I took another sip of coffee. I don't know what you're talking about. My Porsche. It is gone. The spot is empty. You stole it. You hid it somewhere. I checked my watch. Ah, you mean the 2023 Porsche 911 GT3. Yes, you psycho. Where is it? I am calling the police. He grabbed his phone and dialed 911. My car has been stolen, he yelled into the receiver. My soon-to-be ex-wife took it. Send a unit now. He paced the kitchen while he waited, glaring at me. Jessica wandered in, wrapped in a blanket, looking confused. What is going on? Audrey stole my car, Brad spat. But don't worry, she is going to jail. Grand theft auto. This is the end for her. 20 minutes later, 2 uniformed officers arrived. They looked annoyed to be dealing with a domestic dispute so early in the morning. Sir, you reported a stolen vehicle, the older officer asked. Yes, Brad pointed at me. She took it. Check the garage cameras. It was there last night. The officer looked at his clipboard. He didn't look at me. He looked at Brad with a flat expression. Mr. Sterling is the vehicle in question, a black Porsche 911 license plate, VCKING. Yes, Brad said. Find it. We know where it is, sir, the officer said. It wasn't stolen. It was repossessed this morning at 6:30 a.m. by First National Bank. Brad froze. That is impossible. I make the payments. I am rich. I don't get repossessed. The officer handed him a yellow slip of paper. According to the paperwork, the primary borrower on the loan authorized a voluntary surrender of the collateral due to non-payment and breach of contract. Brad snatched the paper. Primary borrower? I am the primary borrower. I set my coffee mug down on the counter. The sound was like a gavel strike. Actually, Brad, you are not, I said softly. He whipped his head around. What? 5 years ago, I said, walking toward him. When you wanted to buy that car to impress your partners, your credit score was 580 because of that failed crypto startup you never told anyone about. You couldn't get a loan for a bicycle, let alone a Porsche. I stopped right in front of him. So I signed for it. My name is on the title. My credit history secured the loan. You were just the authorized driver. I turned to the officer. Officer, as the legal owner of the vehicle, I called the bank yesterday and informed them that I would no longer be making payments on a car I do not drive. I requested an immediate voluntary repossession to protect my credit score from future default. They were happy to oblige. Brad looked at the yellow slip, his hands shaking. You gave away my car. It wasn't your car, Brad, I said, smiling for the first time in days. It never was. Just like this apartment isn't yours. Just like your reputation isn't yours. It was all built on my back, and now I am standing up. Jessica let out a small gasp. Brad looked like he was going to vomit. The officer tipped his hat to me. Have a nice day, ma'am. Mr. Sterling, if you want the car back, you will have to take it up with the bank. They walked out. Brad stood there in his boxers holding the yellow slip, realizing that the walk to the subway station was going to be very long and very humiliating. 2 days after the incident with the Porsche, I received a summons. It was not from a court, but from Robert Sterling, Brad's father. The message was brief and commanded attendance rather than requested it. It said, "Come to the Hamptons estate immediately. We have a settlement offer. Come alone." I knew exactly what this was. It was an ambush. In the world of high-stakes litigation, we call this an intimidation tactic. They bring the adversary onto their home turf, surround them with displays of wealth and power, and try to force a capitulation. They wanted me to feel small. They wanted me to feel like the poor, helpless girl from the wrong side of the tracks that they had graciously allowed into their kingdom. I accepted the invitation. Not because I was scared, but because in the state of New York, a settlement negotiation that involves coercion or bribery is admissible evidence if it proves witness tampering. I put a fresh battery in my digital recorder, slipped it into my blazer pocket, and drove out to Long Island. The Sterling estate was a sprawling oceanfront monstrosity that looked less like a home and more like a museum dedicated to ego. The driveway was a 1/4 mile of crushed white stone. As I pulled up in my rental sedan, I saw Brad's parents standing on the porch like monarchs greeting a peasant. A butler escorted me into the library. It was a room designed to make you feel insignificant, filled with dark mahogany shelves, leather-bound books that nobody had ever read, and the smell of old money and cigar smoke. Brad was there sitting in a wingback chair nursing a glass of scotch. He looked terrible. The arrogance from the courtroom was gone, replaced by the sulky petulance of a child who had been caught stealing cookies. He didn't look at me. Robert Sterling stood behind his massive oak desk. Patricia, my mother-in-law, sat on the sofa, her posture rigid, her face a mask of disdain. "Sit down," Audrey Roberts said, gesturing to a low wooden chair placed in the center of the room. It was positioned so that I had to look up at them. Psychological warfare 101. I remained standing. I prefer to stand, Robert. "What is this offer you mentioned?" Patricia let out a sharp sigh. God, she is so difficult. "Just give it to her, Robert. Let's get this over with so I can have the cleaners sanitize the room." Robert opened a leather portfolio on his desk. He slid a piece of paper across the polished wood, followed by a check. "We have reviewed your little performance in court, Audrey," Robert said, his voice deep and condescending. "We know what you are doing. You are hurt. You are lashing out. You forged those documents about the shell companies to embarrass my son." I raised an eyebrow. "Forged? The Delaware Secretary of State might disagree with you, Robert." "Don't interrupt me," he snapped. "We are willing to overlook your criminal behavior. We are willing to make this all go away. We have prepared a document here. It is a formal retraction. You will sign it admitting that you fabricated the evidence regarding tax evasion due to emotional distress. You will agree to a quiet, uncontested divorce with no alimony." And in exchange, I asked, looking at the check. Robert tapped the check with a gold pen. "In exchange, the Sterling family will gift you this, $50,000. Tax-free." He said the number with such gravity, as if he were handing me the keys to the kingdom. Patricia chimed in, her voice dripping with venom. "It is more money than you have ever seen in your life, Audrey. Take it. Use it to start over somewhere else, somewhere far away. You can go back to whatever trailer park lifestyle you are suited for. You have stained the Sterling name enough." I looked at the check. $50,000. I looked at Brad. He was watching me now, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. He really thought this was going to work. He thought money was the universal solvent. I wanted to laugh. I physically had to bite the inside of my cheek to stop myself from laughing in their faces. They had absolutely no idea. For 5 years, I had played the role of the dutiful, thrifty wife. I clipped coupons. I shopped at discount stores. I drove a used Honda until it died. I let them believe I was making $40,000 a year doing data entry. I let them believe I was financially dependent on Brad's fluctuating venture capital salary. But here is the reality they didn't know. My base salary at the consulting firm is $180,000. But my specialty is forensic asset recovery for federal cases. I get paid a performance bonus based on the assets I recover for the government. Last year, I helped the FBI dismantle a crypto Ponzi scheme worth $200 million. My performance bonus for that single case was $270,000. My total income last year was $450,000. Brad, on his best year, made $220,000 before taxes, and he spent nearly all of it on leased cars, designer suits, and keeping up appearances. I had more liquid cash in my private investment account than Robert Sterling probably had in his checking account right now. This $50,000 wasn't a life-changing sum. It was insulting. It was what I made in 6 weeks. I picked up the check. I looked at it closely. "You want me to sign a confession for perjury in exchange for $50,000, I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "It is not a bribe," Audrey Patricia spat. "It is charity. We are buying your silence because we pity you. You are too poor to fight us. Stanford will drag this out for years. He will bleed you dry in legal fees. You will be bankrupt within a month. This is a lifeline. Take it and disappear." I looked at Brad. "Do you agree with this, Brad? You want me to lie to the court?" Brad took a sip of his scotch. "Just take the money, Audrey. You can't win. Dad knows the judge. Stanford knows the system. You are just a secretary. Know your place. Know your place." That phrase echoed in the library. It was the same phrase they had used for years to silence Nia, Brad's sister-in-law. It was the phrase they used to dismiss the staff. It was the motto of their lives. I placed the check back on the desk. I smoothed it out with my fingers. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a red marker. I drew a large, thick X across the check. "What are you doing?" Robert shouted, his face turning red. "I am declining your generous offer," I said. "And I am adding a counteroffer." I leaned over the desk, invading Robert's personal space. "You think I am poor, Robert. You think I am desperate. But you haven't done your due diligence. You see, unlike your son, I don't spend my money on cocaine and mistresses. I invest it. And unlike your son, I don't cheat on my taxes." I turned to Patricia. "And regarding your concern about legal fees, Patricia, please don't worry about me. I have enough savings to keep this lawsuit going until Brad is in a geriatric ward." I walked toward the door. "Oh, and one more thing. I have this meeting recorded. Attempting to bribe a plaintiff to falsify evidence is a felony in the state of New York. I will be adding this recording to Exhibit B." Patricia stood up, shaking with rage. "You ungrateful little brat! We gave you a life. We gave you status. Who are you without us?" I stopped at the heavy oak doors. I looked back at them, a family of vultures in designer clothes, terrified of the one thing they couldn't buy. "I am the auditor," I said softly, "and your audit is due." I walked out of the library, leaving them in stunned silence. But as I walked down the long hallway toward the exit, I saw someone standing in the shadows of the kitchen entrance. It was Nia. She was holding a tray of appetizers that she clearly hadn't been asked to serve. She looked at me, her dark eyes wide. She had heard everything. I paused. Nia and I had never been close, mostly because Patricia worked hard to keep us separated, pitting us against each other. But in that moment, I saw something in her expression that I recognized. It wasn't fear, it was opportunity. She gave me an almost imperceptible nod. Then she looked down at the tray in her hands, and then back at me, tilting her head toward the back staircase that led to the home office. I understood the message immediately. She wasn't just a bystander. She was a recruit. And while the kings and queens were distracted in the library screaming about my insolence, the castle gates had just been opened from the inside. I walked into the kitchen, my heart still pounding from the confrontation in the library. The Sterling estate had a massive industrial kitchen, fully staffed with caterers for the weekend, yet the atmosphere was suffocating. Standing at the sink was Nia. Nia was my brother-in-law's wife. She was a brilliant neurosurgeon at Mount Sinai Hospital, a woman who spent her days removing tumors from brain stems and saving lives. She was intelligent, poised, and undeniably successful. But in this house, to Patricia Sterling, Nia was just the black girl that her other son had made the mistake of marrying. Patricia followed me into the kitchen, her heels clicking aggressively on the slate floor. She ignored the 3 uniformed catering staff who were currently wiping down the counters. Her eyes locked onto Nia. "Nia," Patricia said, her voice sharp and commanding, "why are there still wine glasses on the side table in the living room?" "The staff is busy preparing dinner. You need to make yourself useful. Go gather them and wash them. And be careful this time. Those are Waterford crystal." I watched Nia freeze. She was wearing a silk blouse and dress slacks, clearly not dressed for housekeeping. She turned slowly, her face composed, but her eyes tired. "Patricia," Nia said softly, "the caterers are right here. I am sure they can handle it. I have a call with the hospital in 10 minutes regarding a patient." Patricia let out a scoff that sounded like a whip crack. "Always the hospital. Always the busy doctor. You are in my house, Nia. In this family, we pitch in. We do not act like guests. Now wash the glasses. Or is that too complicated for you?" The racism was subtle, wrapped in plausible deniability, but it was there. It was always there. Patricia never asked me to wash a dish in 5 years. She only asked Nia. Nia didn't argue. She never argued. She had learned long ago that fighting Patricia was a losing battle that only hurt her husband. She walked over to the sink and reached for the sponge. I felt a surge of cold anger rising in my chest, hotter than the rage I felt for Brad. I walked past Patricia and went straight to the sink. I took the sponge out of Nia's hand. "Stop!" I said firmly. Nia looked at me startled. "Audrey, it is fine. I can do it." "No," I said, turning to face Patricia. She is a neurosurgeon, Patricia. Her hands are insured for more money than this entire house is worth. If you want the glasses washed, tell the staff you are paying. Or better yet, wash them yourself. Patricia's mouth dropped open. She looked from me to Naya, her face turning a blotchy shade of purple. You have grown very bold today, Audrey, Patricia hissed. First you threatened my husband, and now you are giving orders in my kitchen. You are forgetting that you are on your way out of this family, and you, Nia. If you want to side with this traitor, you can leave with her. Patricia turned on her heel and stormed out, likely to go complain to Robert about the insurrection in the kitchen. The room fell silent. The catering staff kept their heads down, pretending they hadn't seen anything, but I saw the head chef smirk slightly. Everyone hated Patricia. Nia let out a long breath and leaned against the granite counter. She looked at her hands, taking a moment to compose herself. "Thank you," she whispered. "You didn't have to do that." I picked up a wine glass and set it down. "Yes, I did. They are monsters, Nia. I am done pretending they are not." Nia looked toward the doorway to ensure we were alone. Then she stepped closer to me. Her voice dropped to a level barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. "I heard what you said in the library," Nia said, "about the audit, about the investigation." I looked at her. I meant every word. "I know you did," she said. Her eyes were intense, sharp with intelligence that she usually hid around the Sterlings. "Listen to me carefully, Audrey. You are looking for Brad's money, but you are looking in the wrong places. You are looking at his income. You need to look at the source." "What do you mean?" I asked. Nia glanced at the door again. "Brad has been managing the family's investment portfolio for the last 2 years. Robert and Patricia gave him full control of their retirement accounts because they don't trust outside bankers. They think Brad is a financial genius because he uses big words." She paused, her hand gripping my arm. "Check the Sterling Legacy Trust. That is the main fund. Robert thinks it is earning 12% annual returns. Brad sends them statements every month showing massive growth. But last month, my husband asked Brad for a loan from the trust to start his own practice, and Brad panicked. He said the money was illiquid, locked up in long-term bonds." Nia's grip tightened. My husband believed him, but I didn't. I saw a letter on Brad's desk when I was over there last week. It was a margin call from a crypto exchange. A margin call. The 2 most dangerous words in finance. Nia leaned in closer. "He is not just hiding his money, Audrey. He is burning theirs. If you want to destroy him, don't just take his car. Expose the trust. That is his Achilles heel." Before I could respond, the kitchen door swung open and Brad walked in, looking for more ice for his scotch. Nia immediately pulled back, her face returning to a mask of indifference. I gave her a slight nod. Message received. I left the estate 10 minutes later. I didn't stay for the settlement discussion. I had everything I needed. I drove straight back to the city, my mind racing. If Nia was right, this wasn't just a divorce case anymore. This was a federal crime of epic proportions. I arrived at my apartment, which was still without electricity. I didn't care. I fired up the generator I had rented on the way home, connected my server stack, and cracked a fresh energy drink. It was time to go hunting. I logged into my specialized forensic software. I didn't have the login credentials for the Sterling Legacy Trust, but I didn't need them to see the external movement of capital. I started by pulling the public tax records for the Sterling Family Foundation, which was the nonprofit arm attached to the trust. From there, I traced the employer identification number. I found the trust's main brokerage account domiciled at a mid-sized bank in Connecticut. Now came the tricky part. I needed to see the transaction history. I couldn't hack the bank, that would be illegal and would land me in jail alongside Brad. But I could use the legal discovery process I had already initiated. I drafted an emergency subpoena. Because I was representing myself, I had the power to issue subpoenas for relevant financial records. I filled out the form digitally, signed it, and sent it to the compliance department of the Connecticut Bank, marking it urgent pending divorce litigation regarding marital assets. Usually banks take weeks to respond, but I knew a trick. I attached the affidavit I had prepared for the IRS whistleblower program, heavily redacted, implying that the bank might be holding proceeds of criminal activity. Bank compliance officers are terrified of the IRS. 3 hours later, at 2 a.m, my secure inbox pinged. The bank had sent the last 12 months of statements for the Sterling Legacy Trust. I opened the first PDF. My eyes scanned the columns. At first glance, it looked normal. There were deposits from Robert's old company stock. There were dividends. But then I looked at the withdrawals. Every month on the 15th, there was a wire transfer of $200,000 to an entity called SVC Prime Management. I cross-referenced SVC Prime Management. It was one of the shell companies I had identified in court, the Gardner's company. But here was the kicker. On the statements Brad sent to his parents, which I found copies of in the shared cloud folder Brad had foolishly synced to our home iPad, he listed these transfers as reinvestment into emerging tech sector. He was taking the principal out, moving it to his shell company, and telling his parents he was buying Google and Apple stock. So where did the money go after it hit SVC Prime Management? I followed the trail. The money stayed in the shell company for less than 24 hours. Then it was wired to an offshore exchange known for high-leverage cryptocurrency trading. I pulled up the historical data for the crypto tokens Brad was betting on. They were obscure, volatile altcoins, the kind of coins that influencers pump and dump. I overlaid Brad's buy dates with the market charts. It was a bloodbath. He bought at the peak. The market crashed. He lost 40% in a week. To cover the loss, he withdrew more money from his parents' trust the next month, betting bigger to try and win it back. Gambler's fallacy. Chasing the loss. I did the math. In 24 months, the Sterling Legacy Trust had gone from $12 million to just under $3 million. He had incinerated $9 million of his parents' retirement money. But wait, how was he paying them the monthly allowance they lived on? I looked closer at the inflows. When Robert requested a withdrawal for his lifestyle expenses, Brad didn't take it from the investment profits because there were no profits. He simply took a chunk of the remaining principal labeled it dividend return and wired it back to them. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating the dark apartment. It was a classic Ponzi scheme, a small familial Ponzi scheme. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul, and both Peter and Paul were his own mother and father. And the icing on the cake, I found a recurring monthly transfer of $15,000 from the shell company to a luxury apartment complex in Soho. I checked the tenant registry. Jessica Davis. He was using his parents' retirement fund to pay the rent for his mistress. I looked at the documents on my screen. This wasn't just leverage for a divorce settlement. This was a nuclear bomb. Robert and Patricia Sterling were not just mean people. They were victims of massive elder financial abuse, and the perpetrator was their golden child. I saved every file. I backed them up to 3 different hard drives. Then I printed a single page. It was a graph showing the plummeting value of the trust overlaid with the transfers to Jessica's apartment. I put the paper in a crisp white envelope. I wasn't going to send this to the lawyers. Not yet. I was going to save this for the deposition. I wanted to see the look in Brad's eyes when he realized that I knew he wasn't a business tycoon. He was just a thief stealing from Grandma's cookie jar. Nia was right. The house was built on sand, and I had just brought a fire hose. The repo man taking the Porsche was a blow to Brad's ego, but it wasn't a fatal one. Brad was the kind of man who believed that every problem could be solved if you just yelled loud enough or threw enough money at it. But now that his money was drying up, he reverted to his most primal instinct, which was cruelty. He decided that if he couldn't beat me in court, he would starve me out. He believed the narrative he had invented for me. He truly thought I was a helpless administrative assistant making $40,000 a year. In his mind, without his financial support, I would be unable to pay for food, let alone legal fees. He thought that if he cut off my paycheck, I would come crawling back to him begging for that $50,000 settlement. So he decided to get me fired. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was working from a coffee shop down the street because the power in the apartment was still cut, and I didn't want to waste my generator fuel during the day. My phone buzzed. It was a secure message from a number I recognized immediately. It was Special Agent in Charge Thomas Miller. He was the head of the FBI White-Collar Crimes Division in New York, and he was technically my handler for the freelance forensic work I did. The message read simply, "Call me. You are going to want to hear this." I put on my headset and dialed. Miller picked up on the first ring. Audrey Miller said, his voice sounding amused. I just had the most interesting conversation. I think you should hear the recording. He played the audio file. The quality was crystal clear. It began with the ring of a standard office phone. Data Verify Solutions, Miller's voice said on the recording. This was the shell company name we used for my employment verification. To the outside world, it looked like a boring data processing firm. To those in the know, it was a front for bureau contractors. I need to speak to the manager. Brad's voice barked. He didn't even say hello. Speaking, Miller said calmly. Who is this? This is Brad Sterling. I am a partner at Sterling Venture Capital. I am calling regarding one of your employees. Audrey Sterling. I listened as Miller paused on the recording. I could practically hear him smiling. Yes, Mrs. Sterling is a valued member of our team. How can I help you, Mr. Sterling? She is my wife, Brad said, his voice dripping with entitlement. And we are going through a divorce. I feel it is my duty to inform you that she is mentally unstable. She has been stealing from me. She is currently under investigation for fraud. Having her on your payroll is a liability to your company. I took a sip of my coffee, shaking my head. He was lying, of course. But more importantly, he was stupid. Really? Miller asked, feigning concern. That is a serious accusation. Do you have proof I don't need proof? I am Brad Sterling, he shouted. Look, buddy, I know how these little companies work. You guys survive on contracts. I know people. I know investors. If you don't fire her effective immediately, I will make sure your company gets blacklisted. I will ruin your reputation. Do you understand me? I want her out on the street today. There was a long silence on the recording. Mr. Sterling Miller said, his voice dropping that friendly customer service tone and shifting into the cold, hard steel of a federal agent. Are you threatening me? I am telling you how the world works, Brad sneered. Fire her, or I will crush you. Let me be clear, Miller said. You are calling a federal contractor and attempting to use economic extortion to terminate a witness in an active litigation. You are also making false statements to damage the reputation of an employee. I don't care about your legal mumbo-jumbo, Brad yelled. Just fire the bitch. The line went dead. Brad had hung up. I sat in the coffee shop listening to the dial tone on the recording. Miller came back on the line. Well, Miller said, that was colorful. I am sorry he bothered you, Thomas, I said. Bothered me, Audrey. He just handed us a gift-wrapped indictment. That was a recorded threat against a federal entity. Plus, since he is trying to get you fired to stop you from testifying in court, that counts as witness tampering and obstruction of justice. I am forwarding this audio file to the prosecutor's office. Thank you, Thomas. Don't thank me. Thank your husband. He just added 5 years to his potential sentence. I hung up the phone. I felt a strange sense of pity for Brad. He was playing checkers while I was playing three-dimensional chess. He thought he had just destroyed my career. In reality, he had just confessed to a felony on a recorded line with a high-ranking FBI official. I packed up my laptop and headed back to the apartment building. I knew Brad would be coming home soon, expecting to find me crying and destitute. I was wrong. He didn't wait to find me. He decided to speed up the eviction process himself. When I stepped off the elevator onto the penthouse floor, the first thing I saw was my clothes. My vintage silk scarves were strewn across the hallway carpet like colorful snakes. My coats were in a pile near the emergency exit. My books, my shoes, my carefully organized files were scattered everywhere. And there was Brad. He was standing in the doorway of our apartment, red-faced and sweating, holding a box of my personal belongings. He saw me step off the elevator, and his eyes lit up with malicious glee. There she is, he shouted, his voice echoing in the marble hallway. The unemployed squatter. He threw the box on the floor. It burst open. My makeup spilled out, shattering on the hard tile. Expensive foundation and powder exploded in a cloud of beige dust. Brad, I said, keeping my voice low. Stop this. I did it, Audrey. He laughed, pointing a finger at me. I called your little boss. I told him the truth about you. You are fired. You have nothing. No job, no money, no husband. You are trash. He went back inside and grabbed another armful of my things. He came out and hurled them at my feet. It was my jewelry box. Necklaces and earrings scattered across the floor. Get out, he screamed. Get out of my building. That is when the doors started opening. We lived in a building populated by doctors, lawyers, and investment bankers. These were people who valued privacy, but they also valued spectacle. Mrs. Goldberg from 4B opened her door. She was holding her iPhone recording. Mr. Henderson from 4C stepped out, his phone also raised. Brad didn't care. He was too far gone. The cocaine from the night before combined with the stress and the alcohol had broken his filter. "Look at her," Brad yelled to the neighbors, gesturing at me. "She is a leech. She lived off me for 5 years and now she is trying to steal my money." I didn't pick up the clothes. I didn't try to stop him. I stood perfectly still, my hands clasped in front of me, looking at him with a mixture of sadness and fear. I made sure my face was visible to Mrs. Goldberg's camera. "Brad, please," I said, making sure my voice was loud enough to be picked up by the microphones, but soft enough to sound like a victim. "You are scaring me. Please let me go inside." "No, you are not coming in." I changed the locks. He hadn't changed the locks, of course. He didn't know how. But the intent was clear. He ran back inside and came out with something that made my stomach drop. It was Barnaby's dog bed. He threw the orthopedic bed into the hallway. Then he grabbed a bag of dog food and ripped it open, shaking it all over the hallway floor. Kibble rained down on my silk scarves. "Take your mutt and get out." The elevator dinged again. The doorman, a large man named Henry, who had always liked me, stepped out. He looked at the mess. He looked at Brad, who was panting and wild-eyed. "Mr. Sterling." Henry said, his voice stern. "You need to stop. You work for me," Brad screamed at the doorman. "Throw her out. I work for the building," Sir Henry said, stepping between Brad and me. "And you are disturbing the peace." Brad shoved Henry. It was a weak shove, but it was physical contact. A collective gasp went up from the neighbors filming. "That is assault," Mr. Henderson said from his doorway. "I got that on video." Brad froze. He looked around, suddenly realizing he had an audience. He saw the phones. He saw the disgust on their faces. She started it." Brad stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me. I hadn't moved an inch. Henry the doorman adjusted his jacket. "Mr. Sterling, the police are on their way. I suggest you go back inside and cool off. Mrs. Sterling, are you all right?" I nodded slowly, wiping a fake tear from my cheek. "I just want to get my dog, Henry." "Is Barnaby inside?" Brad blocked the doorway. "You are not getting the dog. The dog stays. I am going to take him to the pound tomorrow." That was the wrong thing to say. In New York City, you can mess with people's money, you can mess with their spouses, but you do not threaten their dogs. Mrs. Goldberg stepped forward. She was a 60-year-old trial lawyer. "If you touch that dog, Brad," she said, her voice like a jagged knife, "I will personally sue you into the Stone Age, and I will represent Audrey pro bono in the animal cruelty case." Brad looked at her, then at Henry, then at me. He realized he was surrounded. The hallway, once his domain of power, had turned into a courtroom where the jury was already voting against him. He slammed the apartment door shut. I heard the deadbolt slide. I stood in the hallway, surrounded by my broken possessions and dog food. Henry put a hand on my shoulder. "I am so sorry, Mrs. Sterling. We have the master key. We can let you in." "No, Henry," I said softly. "Leave it. Leave everything exactly where it is." I turned to Mrs. Goldberg. "Can you send me that video?" "Of course, dear," she said. I looked at the closed door. Brad thought he had humiliated me. He thought he had thrown me out like trash. But all he had done was provide me with Exhibit C, domestic disturbance, destruction of property, and attempted illegal eviction. And the best part, he still thought I was fired. He had no idea that while he was throwing my shoes, Agent Miller was already typing up the warrant for his arrest. I picked up my purse. I would spend the night at a hotel. Let him have the apartment for one more night. It would be his last night of freedom anyway. The day after Brad threw my clothes into the hallway, the legal war shifted from the physical world back to the digital one. Brad and his lawyer Stanford were desperate. They knew that the eviction attempt had been a public relations disaster, especially after Mrs. Goldberg uploaded the video to a neighborhood watch group where it was currently trending. They needed a win. They needed to paint me as the villain, and they thought they finally had the smoking gun to do it. At 9 in the morning, I received an emergency notification. Stanford had filed an ex parte motion demanding an immediate hearing regarding what he called grand larceny and cybercrimes. We convened via Zoom. The judge, Justice O'Connor, looked irritated to be dragged onto a video call so early. Brad was sitting in Stanford's plush office, wearing a fresh suit, looking smug. He clearly thought this was the moment he would finally crush me. Stanford began his opening statement with the theatrical flair of a man who believed he was about to deliver a knockout punch. "Your Honor," Stanford said, leaning into the camera lens, "we are here because Mrs. Sterling has escalated this divorce into criminal territory. Yesterday afternoon, we received a frantic alert from the bank. $500,000 was drained from the joint savings account." He paused for dramatic effect. "This was not a withdrawal for living expenses, Your Honor. This was a targeted, sophisticated hack. Mrs. Sterling used her knowledge of the victim's passwords to bypass two-factor authentication and wire $500,000 to an unknown offshore location. This is theft, plain and simple. She is looting the marital estate before fleeing the jurisdiction. We are requesting an immediate freezing of her assets and a warrant for her arrest." Brad nodded vigorously next to him. "She is a hacker. Judge," he shouted. "She stole my money." I sat in my hotel room wearing a simple white blouse, sipping tea. I watched them hyperventilate. I waited for the judge to look at me. "Mrs. Sterling," the judge said, his voice stern, "these are serious accusations. Did you transfer $500,000 out of the joint account yesterday?" I set my teacup down. "Yes, Your Honor, I did." Stanford slammed his hand on the desk. "Ha! She admits it. It is on the record. Arrest her." The judge frowned. "Mr. Stanford, control your client." "Mrs. Sterling, why did you remove these funds and where are they now?" I looked directly into the camera lens. "Your Honor, yesterday, my husband attempted an illegal eviction during which he destroyed my personal property and threatened my support animal. Given his erratic behavior and his documented substance abuse evidence, of which I have already submitted to the court, I had reason to believe he would dissipate the marital assets to fund his addiction or to hide them in his shell companies." I picked up a document and held it up to the camera. Therefore, acting in my capacity as a joint account holder, I transferred the funds directly into the court's controlled escrow account. I saw Stanford's face drop. The smugness evaporated instantly. I continued. "The money is not in an offshore account, Your Honor. It is sitting in the Clerk of Court's trust fund, waiting for your ruling on equitable distribution. I have the receipt number right here. I did not steal the money. I secured it to prevent Mr. Sterling from snorting it or gambling it away on cryptocurrency." The silence on the Zoom call was deafening. Escrow is the legal equivalent of putting the money in a safe that only the judge has the key to. It proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that I had no intention of keeping the money for myself illegally. It proves I was acting as a responsible steward of the estate. But more importantly, it proved that Stanford and Brad were incompetent. If they had spent 5 minutes doing their due diligence, they would have seen the destination of the wire transfer. It was public record. But they were so eager to call me a thief, so desperate to find dirt on me, that they rushed into court with a false accusation. The judge rubbed his temples. "Mr. Stanford," the judge said, his voice low and dangerous, "did you not check the wire confirmation before accusing the defendant of a felony?" Stanford stammered, The alert. It looks suspicious." "You accused a woman of grand larceny for depositing money into my own court's bank account," the judge snapped. "This is a frivolous motion, and it borders on defamation. I am denying your request for an arrest warrant. And frankly, I am starting to question your firm's competence." Brad looked at Stanford with pure hatred. He had paid this lawyer thousands of dollars an hour to look like an idiot on national broadband. The judge continued, "Since the money is now in escrow, it will stay there until the trial is over. Mr. Sterling, you no longer have access to that $500,000. Good day." The screen went black. The hearing was over. I leaned back in my chair. That $500,000 was the last of Brad's liquid cash. The rest was tied up in his failing investments or hidden in the trust he was embezzling from. By moving it to escrow, I had effectively frozen his war chest. He couldn't pay Stanford. He couldn't pay rent for Jessica. I had cut off his oxygen. But the victory felt hollow, because while I was winning the financial war, the emotional toll was starting to weigh on me. I was living in a hotel, my dog was confused, my home was a war zone. I needed a distraction. I opened my laptop and logged into my burner Instagram account. I wanted to see how the other half of this disaster was handling the pressure. I navigated to Jessica Davis's profile. She was active, very active. Her story circle was glowing. I clicked on it. The first clip was her at a brunch spot clinking mimosa glasses with friends. The caption read, "Haters gonna hate, potatoes gonna potate." I rolled my eyes. She was 22 and lived her life in memes. The next clip was a video of her walking down the street in Soho. The caption read, "Retail therapy with daddy's money." She was carrying shopping bags from high-end boutiques. This was evidence I could use later to prove Brad was dissipating assets on a paramour. I took a screenshot. But it was the third story that made my heart stop. It was a boomerang video, a close-up of her hand holding a vanilla latte. But the focus wasn't on the coffee, it was on her ring finger. On her finger sat a massive diamond ring. I froze. I stopped the video and zoomed in. The diamond was a 3-carat old European cut. It had a very specific, slightly warmer color grade, not the icy white of modern diamonds. The setting was platinum, with intricate filigree work on the sides that was worn down slightly on the left edge. I knew that ring. I knew every scratch, every facet, every flaw. That was not a new ring from Tiffany's. That was my great-grandmother's engagement ring. My breath caught in my throat. I felt a physical pain in my chest, sharper than any insult Brad had thrown at me. 2 years ago, that ring had gone missing. I kept it in the safe in our bedroom. One day I went to take it out to have it cleaned for a special occasion, and the box was empty. I had panicked. I tore the apartment apart. I cried for days. That ring was the only thing I had left of my mother's lineage. It was priceless to me. Brad had been so supportive. He helped me look under the bed. He called the insurance company. He held me while I sobbed. It must have been the cleaning lady, Brad had said, shaking his head. Or maybe a burglar. Don't worry, babe. I will buy you a new one. A better one. I had believed him. I had filed a police report for a stolen item against a person unknown. But it wasn't unknown. He had stolen it. He had gone into my safe, taken the most precious heirloom I owned and hidden it. He had watched me cry. He had comforted me while knowing exactly where it was. And now he had given it to his 22-year-old mistress as a trophy. He didn't just steal a ring. He stole my history. He repurposed my grandmother's legacy to propose to the woman he was cheating on me with. The level of sociopathy required to do that was staggering. It wasn't just greed. It was a desire to erase me, to take everything that made me who I was and give it to someone else. I stared at the photo of Jessica's manicured hand. The ring looked too big for her. It looked wrong. It looked violated. My sadness evaporated. The cold, calculating forensic accountant was gone. In her place was something much more dangerous. A woman who had been violated in the most personal way possible. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my laptop. I picked up my phone and dialed the detective who had handled the original theft report 2 years ago. "Detective Miller," I said when he answered. "This is Audrey Sterling. Do you remember the case regarding the antique diamond ring from 2 years ago, the one we thought was a burglary?" "Yes, Mrs. Sterling, I remember," he said. "We never found a lead." "I found it," I said, my voice shaking with controlled rage. "And I know who has it. It is currently in the possession of a woman named Jessica Davis, and I have photographic proof that she received it from my husband." I paused. "I would like to press charges for grand larceny and possession of stolen property. And detective, since the value of the ring is over $50,000, that is a Class B felony." I hung up the phone. Moving money into escrow was a strategic move. But this was war. Brad thought he could hurt me by cutting off my electricity. He had no idea what pain was. He was about to find out that diamonds really are forever. And so are criminal records. I looked at the picture one last time. Jessica was smiling, oblivious to the fact that she was wearing a pair of handcuffs on her finger. I closed the laptop. The gloves were off. I wasn't just going to bankrupt him anymore. I was going to put him in a cage. I arrived at the first precinct in Lower Manhattan exactly 45 minutes after seeing the Instagram post. I was not hysterical. I was not crying. I was armed with a manila folder containing the original appraisal of the ring from 1925, the insurance policy listing me as the sole owner, and the police report filed 2 years ago when the ring first went missing. Detective Miller met me in the interview room. He was a no-nonsense veteran who had seen everything, but even he raised an eyebrow when I laid out the timeline. "So, you are telling me," Miller said, looking at the high-resolution printout of Jessica's hand, "that your husband stole this heirloom from your safe, pretended to help you look for it, and then 2 years later gave it to his mistress as an engagement ring?" "That is exactly what I am telling you, Detective," I replied. "And under New York penal law, possession of stolen property valued over $50,000 is a Class B felony. That ring was appraised at $75,000. Miller looked at the photo, then at the appraisal document. He stood up and grabbed his jacket. "Let's go get your grandmother's ring back, Mrs. Sterling." We drove to the luxury apartment complex in Soho where Jessica lived, the one paid for by Brad's shell company. I sat in the back of the unmarked police car, my hands folded in my lap. I asked the detective to park a little bit away. I wanted to watch, but I did not want to interfere. This was a matter for the state now. Miller and 2 uniformed officers walked up to the building. The doorman tried to stop them, but a flash of the badge made him step aside quickly. They went up to the 5th floor. I couldn't see what was happening inside, but I could imagine it. And thanks to the police scanner app on my phone, I could hear the radio chatter. "Unit 4 to dispatch. We have made contact with the suspect. She is refusing to open the door." I listened as the situation escalated. Jessica, in her infinite wisdom, had decided that the best way to deal with the NYPD was to scream at them through the door that her boyfriend was rich and would have their badges. 10 minutes later, the radio crackled again. "Suspect is in custody. Ring has been recovered. Requesting backup for transport. We have a second individual on scene attempting to obstruct." A second individual. Brad. He must have been there with her, probably celebrating their engagement and laughing about how he had finally gotten rid of me. I watched the front entrance of the building. A small crowd had gathered. In New York, nothing draws a crowd faster than flashing lights in a rich neighborhood. First, Jessica came out. She was not wearing her designer heels. She was barefoot, wearing a silk robe, and her hands were cuffed behind her back. She was crying hysterically, screaming that it was a mistake, that the ring was a gift. Then came Brad. He was not in cuffs yet, but he was being physically restrained by a large officer. He was red in the face, shouting at Detective Miller, "This is harassment. Do you know who I am? I am Bradley Sterling. That ring belongs to me. I bought it." Detective Miller stopped on the sidewalk. He turned to Brad, and his voice carried over the noise of the street. "Mr. Sterling, unless you can produce a receipt for an antique ring from 1925 that predates your birth by 60 years, I suggest you shut your mouth. You are already looking at a charge for filing a false police report 2 years ago. Do not add assaulting an officer to the list." Brad shut his mouth, but it was too late. Standing in the crowd of onlookers was a freelance photographer, the kind that patrols Soho looking for celebrities. He recognized Brad. Or rather, he recognized the chaos. He started snapping photos. Click. Brad looking like a maniac being held back by cops. Click. Jessica in handcuffs looking like a ruined debutante. Click. The police officer holding a clear evidence bag containing a shimmering diamond ring. I watched as they shoved Jessica into the back of a patrol car. Brad was left standing on the sidewalk watching his fiancée being hauled away for a crime he committed. I texted Detective Miller, "Thank you." Then I told the driver to take me back to my hotel. I had a ring to collect from the evidence locker in the morning, but first I had to watch the fallout. By the time I got back to my room, the photos were already on Twitter. The caption read, "Partner at Sterling VC watches, fiancé get arrested in Soho raid. Stolen heirloom recovered." The internet did what the internet does best. They dug. Within an hour, people had identified Brad. They identified his firm, and then the reviews started coming in. I refreshed the Google page for Sterling Venture Capital. 1 star. CEO dates thieves. 1 star. Invests in stolen jewelry, not companies. 1 star. If he steals from his wife, imagine what he does with your investment. My phone rang. It was Nia. Did you see the news? She asked, her voice breathless. I saw it, I said. Audrey, it is worse than you think, Nia said. Robert just called Brad. The investors are pulling out. The news of the raid spooked the limited partners. They are triggering the key man clause in their contracts. They are demanding an audit of the fund. An audit. The one thing Brad could not survive. If they audited the fund, they would see the holes. They would see the missing millions. They would see the transfers to the shell companies. The police raid for the ring was the domino that knocked over the entire house of cards. Brad thought he could handle a domestic dispute. He thought he could handle a divorce, but he couldn't handle a loss of confidence. In finance, reputation is currency. And his reputation was currently sitting in the back of a police cruiser barefoot and crying. Later that evening, Brad went to the precinct to bail Jessica out. I was told by Miller that it was a spectacle. Brad tried to write a check for the bail bond. The bondsman refused it. Your credit cards are declined, Mr. Sterling, the bondsman said, and your check verification failed. Cash only. Brad didn't have $50,000 in cash. He didn't have access to the joint account anymore because I had moved it to escrow. He didn't have access to the trust fund because the bank had frozen it pending the IRS investigation I had triggered. He had to call his father. I can only imagine the conversation. Robert Sterling, the man who cared about image above all else, having to drive into the city at midnight to bail out his son's mistress for possession of stolen property. I slept soundly that night. The next morning I went to the station. Detective Miller handed me the evidence release form. I signed it. He handed me the clear plastic bag. Inside sat my great-grandmother's ring. It needed to be cleaned. It needed to be sanitized of the bad energy it had absorbed. But it was mine. I put it in my purse. You know, Miller said, leaning back in his chair, we are looking into the husband for the original theft. But since the statute of limitations is tricky on domestic cases, the DA might just focus on the tax fraud and the money laundering evidence you sent over. It is a slam dunk. I nodded. That is fine by me, Detective. The ring was personal. The rest is just business. I walked out of the station. The sun was shining. I checked my email. There was a message from the managing partner of Sterling Venture Capital, Brad's actual boss, the senior partner who really ran things. Mrs. Sterling, we have seen the news. We would like to assure you that the firm does not condone this behavior. Bradley has been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. We understand you have financial expertise. We would appreciate your cooperation in helping us understand the current state of the books. They were asking me to help them audit my own husband. I smiled. The hunter had become the consultant. I typed a reply. I would be happy to assist. My hourly rate is $1,000, and I will need full access to the server. The circle was closing. Brad had lost his car. His mistress was a felon. His parents were furious, and now his wife was about to become his auditor. But the biggest blow was yet to come. The deposition was scheduled for tomorrow. And I wasn't just bringing spreadsheets. I was bringing the witness that would shatter him completely. I was bringing the gardener. The conference room at the law firm of Stanford & Partners was designed to intimidate. It was located on the 45th floor, encased in floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic view of the city I was about to conquer. The air conditioning was set to a freezing temperature, a common tactic used to make witnesses uncomfortable. But I was wearing a wool blazer and my blood was running hot with anticipation. Across the long mahogany table sat Brad. He looked like a shadow of the man he was 2 weeks ago. His skin was sallow, his eyes were rimmed with dark circles, and he kept tapping his pen against the table in a nervous, erratic rhythm. Next to him sat Stanford, his lawyer, who looked equally exhausted. They had spent the last 48 hours trying to perform damage control after the arrest of Jessica, but they were drowning and they knew it. In the corner, a court reporter sat with her stenography machine, ready to transcribe every stutter and every lie. A videographer adjusted the camera lens, pointing it directly at Brad's face. I sat alone on my side of the table. No lawyer, no assistants, just me and a stack of banker's boxes that I had wheeled in on a trolley. The videographer checked his watch. We are on the record. Today is May 12th. The time is 9 a.m. This is the deposition of Bradley Sterling in the matter of Sterling versus Sterling. Mrs. Sterling, you may proceed. I opened the first folder. The sound of the paper sliding against the wood was the only noise in the room. Good morning, Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice pleasant and professional. I would like to remind you that you are under oath. The penalty for perjury in a deposition is the same as it is in a courtroom. Do you understand? Brad sneered. Just ask your questions, Audrey. Let's get this over with. I nodded. Let's begin with your employment. You are currently a partner at Sterling Venture Capital, correct? Technically, I am on leave, Brad muttered. And what is the nature of your role there? I asked. I am an investment strategist, he said, puffing out his chest slightly. I identify high-growth opportunities in the tech sector. I manage client relationships. I make rain. You make rain, I repeated. Interesting choice of words. Let's look at some of the expenses involved in this rainmaking. I pulled out a document marked Exhibit D. I slid it across the table to him. Please look at line item 4. This is a credit card statement from your corporate American Express dated November 14th of last year. There is a charge for $12,400. The merchant is listed as SGC Hospitality Group. Can you explain this expense? Brad glanced at the paper. It was a client dinner. We closed a big deal that night. I took the founders out to celebrate. High-end steakhouse, expensive wine. It is standard industry practice. Stanford nodded in agreement. Legitimate business expense. Move on. I didn't move on. I pulled out another piece of paper. Exhibit D, subsection 1, I said. I did a merchant category code search for SGC Hospitality Group. It does not map to a restaurant. It maps to an establishment called the Sapphire Gentlemen's Club. Brad froze. I continued, and I took the liberty of cross-referencing the date. November 14th. That was the night you told me you were at a mandatory compliance seminar in Boston. But according to the geolocation data from your company phone, which is billed to the account I pay you, were in downtown Manhattan. I leaned forward. So, Mr. Sterling, did you take the founders of a tech startup to a strip club and spend $12,000 on what is itemized here as private dances and bottle service? Brad shifted in his chair. He looked at Stanford. Stanford looked at the ceiling. It was a different kind of meeting, Brad stammered. Sometimes clients want to blow off steam. It is how business gets done. I said, writing something down on my notepad. So you admit to lying to your wife about your whereabouts, and you admit to using corporate funds for adult entertainment. Thank you. That establishes a pattern of dishonesty. Objection, Stanford shouted. You are badgering the witness. I am establishing credibility. Mr. Stanford, I replied calmly, and we are just getting started. I opened the next folder. This one was thicker. Let's talk about your investment strategy, Brad. You mentioned you identify high-growth opportunities. Please turn to Exhibit E. Brad turned the page. His hand was shaking now. This is a list of vendors paid by Sterling Venture Capital over the last 24 months. I want to focus on a company called Alpha Omega Consulting LLC. Brad swallowed hard. I could see the sweat forming on his upper lip. I continued. Your firm has paid Alpha Omega Consulting a total of $350,000 in the last year. The invoices describe the services as proprietary market research and algorithmic analysis. That is correct, Brad said, his voice cracking. They are a boutique firm, very exclusive. They provide data that no one else has. I see. And who is the principal analyst at this firm? Who is the genius behind this proprietary data? Brad blinked. It is a team of experts. I pulled out a photo. It was a picture of a suburban house in New Jersey with a Toyota Camry in the driveway and a plastic flamingo on the lawn. This is the registered business address for Alpha Omega Consulting LLC, I said. 4-2 Oak Creek Lane. Does this address look familiar to you, Brad? He didn't answer. He stared at the photo. Let me refresh your memory, I said. This is the home of Mrs. Linda Davis. Brad closed his eyes. For the record, I said to the videographer, Mrs. Linda Davis is the mother of Jessica Davis, the woman currently out on bail for possessing my stolen jewelry. I turned back to Brad. So let me get this straight. You paid your mistress's mother $350,000 for algorithmic analysis. Does Mrs. Davis have a background in data science? Because according to her LinkedIn profile, which I have printed here as Exhibit F, she has been a part-time floral arranger for the last 15 years. Brad slammed his hand on the table. It was a retainer. We were paying for access. You don't understand how this industry works. I understand exactly how it works, Brad, I said, my voice dropping an octave. It is called embezzlement. You were siphoning money out of your firm, funneling it through a shell company registered to your girlfriend's mother, and using it to fund your lifestyle. I pulled out another bank statement, Exhibit G. This is the bank account for Alpha Omega Consulting. As you can see, the money goes in from your firm, and within 24 hours it goes out. Cash withdrawals, payments for a luxury lease in Soho, payments for a leased Porsche, and payments to a crypto exchange. I looked at him with pure clinical detachment. Did you report this $350,000 as income on our joint tax returns? Brad, no answer. Because I checked the returns, I said. You didn't. So now we have wire fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. Stanford leaned over and whispered frantically in Brad's ear. I could hear him hissing, "Stop talking. Fifth Amendment, pleading the Fifth." But Brad was too arrogant to stay silent. He couldn't handle being cornered by the wife he thought was stupid. "It was my money," he shouted, pushing Stanford away. "I earned it. I brought in the clients. If I want to structure my compensation through a consultant, that is my business." "Structure your compensation," I repeated. "Is that what you call it? Let's look at where the money came from, Brad. Because it wasn't just corporate profits, was it?" I opened the third box. This was the one that Nia had helped me fill. This was the kill shot. Exhibit H, I said. These are the monthly statements for the Sterling Legacy Trust, the retirement fund of Robert and Patricia Sterling. Brad's face went white, a true ghostly white. He looked like he was going to vomit right there on the polished table. Stanford looked at the document and his eyes widened. He hadn't seen this one. Brad hadn't told his lawyer about stealing from Mommy and Daddy. I walked him through the numbers, step by agonizing step. On January 15th, you moved $200,000 from your parents' trust to a company called SVC Prime Management. You marked it as a capital call for a tech unicorn. I flipped the page. On January 16th, SVC Prime Management transferred $195,000 to a wallet address on the Binance exchange. I flipped another page. On January 17th, that wallet purchased a large amount of a token called Moonrocket. I looked at Brad. Do you know what happened to Moonrocket on January 18th, Brad? He was breathing heavy now, gasping for air. It crashed, I said. It went to zero. You lost your parents' money in 48 hours. I wasn't done. And the next month, you did it again. And again. You churned their account. You treated their life savings like chips at a casino. And when you lost, you just took more. I slid a graph across the table. It showed a red line plunging straight down. You have depleted the trust by $9 million, Brad. The only money left in there is the principal that is locked in illiquid real estate. The cash gone. The stock's gone. Brad put his head in his hands. And here is the most interesting part, I said, delivering the final blow. I spoke to the gardener yesterday, Mr. Alejandro Santiago, the man listed as the director of SVC Prime Management. Brad looked up, terror in his eyes. He is a lovely man, I said. He speaks very little English. He told me that you asked him to sign some papers 3 years ago. You told him it was for insurance so he could keep working on the estate. You stole his identity, Brad. You made an innocent immigrant the face of your fraud scheme. Stanford stood up. He was pale. He began packing his briefcase. The deposition is over. Stanford said, his voice shaking. We are done for the day. I didn't move. We are not done. Mr. Stanford, I said, I have one more question for the record. I looked directly into the camera lens. Mr. Sterling, in light of the evidence presented today, the theft of client funds, the embezzlement of family assets, the tax evasion, the identity theft, and the money laundering, do you still maintain that I am the one who is financially incompetent? Brad didn't answer. He couldn't. He just stared at the table, watching his reflection in the polished wood, seeing a man who was already dead but just hadn't stopped breathing yet. I turned to the court reporter. No further questions. I closed my folders. I stacked them neatly back into the banker's box. As I stood up to leave, Stanford grabbed Brad's arm and practically dragged him out of the room. I could hear Stanford yelling at him in the hallway, words like federal prison and insanity echoing through the glass walls. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. It was a beautiful day. The sun was shining on the skyscrapers. Somewhere down there in the financial district, the FBI was currently executing the search warrant that Agent Miller had obtained based on the preview of this deposition I had sent him an hour ago. Brad thought this was just a divorce hearing. He didn't realize it was his sentencing. I took a deep breath. The air in the room was still cold, still conditioned, but for the first time in 5 years, I felt warm. I pulled out my phone and texted Naya. "It is done. Check the news in an hour." Then, I wheeled my trolley out of the room past the stunned receptionist and into the elevator, going down, just like the Sterling dynasty. The deposition had cracked the foundation, but the hearing regarding the preservation of assets was where the house would come down. The courtroom was packed. The press had smelled blood after the ring arrest, and the gallery was full of reporters. My in-laws, Robert and Patricia Sterling, sat in the front row behind Brad. They looked regal, dressed in matching navy blue, projecting an image of unshakable family unity. They were glaring at me, their eyes promising retribution. They believed that despite Brad's incompetence, the family name would protect them. They believed that witnesses could be bought or intimidated. They were about to learn that they were wrong. I called my next witness, Dr. Naya Sterling. A ripple of confusion went through the Sterling bench. Robert leaned forward, whispering furiously to Patricia. They clearly thought this was a mistake. Why would I call their daughter-in-law Nia was part of the inner circle? She was family. In their minds, she was property. Nia walked to the stand. She didn't look at the Sterlings. She looked straight ahead, her posture perfect, her face unreadable. She took the oath. I stood up. Dr. Sterling, thank you for being here. Can you please state your relationship to the defendant? He is my brother-in-law, Nia said quietly, and you are married to his younger brother, correct? Yes. I walked over to the exhibit table. I picked up a small flash drive. Dr. Sterling, were you present at the Sterling family estate in the Hamptons on the evening of May 5th? Yes, I was. And during that evening, did you witness a conversation between Robert Sterling, Patricia Sterling, and the defendant Bradley Sterling? Yes, I did. I held up the drive. And did you record that conversation? Stanford Brad's lawyer jumped up. Objection. Surreptitious recording is inadmissible if there is a reasonable expectation of privacy. I turned to the judge. Your Honor. New York is a one-party consent state. Dr. Sterling was a participant in the gathering. Furthermore, the conversation took place in the living room with catering staff present nearby. There was no expectation of privacy. The judge nodded. Overruled. Play the tape. I plugged the drive into the court system. The audio boomed through the speakers. The quality was perfect. You could hear the clinking of ice in glasses. Then Robert Sterling's voice filled the room. Listen to me, Brad. We need to move the beach house. Audrey is going to come for it. We need to transfer the deed to your sister Bethany. We will backdate the sale to last year. We can say you sold it to her to pay off a gambling debt. That way it looks like the asset was gone before the divorce started. The courtroom gasped. This was conspiracy to commit fraud. Then Patricia's voice. And the artwork, the Warhols. We need to get them out of the penthouse tonight. Tell the doorman to disable the cameras. We will say they were sent for cleaning and got lost in transit. Let her try to sue the shipping company. Then Brad's voice. What about the cash in the safe? Robert's voice again. Give it to Nia. She can hide it in her personal account. Audrey won't suspect her. She is just the help. The audio cut off. Silence. Absolute suffocating silence. I looked at the Sterling bench. Robert was purple. Patricia looked like she had been slapped. They were staring at Nia with pure hatred. I turned back to Nia. Dr. Sterling, did you agree to hide this cash? No, Nia said clearly. I did not. And why did you decide to record this conversation and bring it to me? Nia turned her head. For the first time, she looked directly at Patricia and Robert, because she said, her voice trembling slightly but gaining strength with every word. I have been in this family for 10 years. For 10 years I have saved lives in the operating room, yet I come home to be treated like a servant. You have called me an outsider. You have made jokes about my background. You have treated me like I am invisible. She paused, taking a deep breath. I stayed silent when you insulted me because I loved my husband, but I will not stay silent when you ask me to become an accomplice to a felony. I am a doctor. I took an oath to do no harm, and what you are doing to Audrey is harm. She looked at the judge. They are not just hiding assets, Your Honor. They are stealing them, and I refuse to let them use my name to do it. Stanford slumped in his chair. He knew it was over. The family defense was dead. Nia hadn't just switched sides. She had burned the bridge and danced on the ashes. The judge looked at Robert and Patricia. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, I am issuing an immediate freezing order on all your personal assets, pending an investigation into bankruptcy fraud and conspiracy. You are to remain in the jurisdiction. Nia stepped down from the stand. As she walked past me, our eyes met. We didn't smile. We didn't high-five. We just exchanged a look of mutual respect. The unspoken bond of two women who had survived the same toxicity and finally decided to fight back. But I wasn't done. The recording proved they were hiding money. Now I had to prove where the dirty money was coming from. I turned to the judge. Your Honor, I have one final piece of evidence to submit regarding the defendant's business activities. This addresses the source of the funds flowing through his shell companies. I pulled out a diagram. It was complex, looking like a spider web of transactions. We have established that Brad Sterling was using his parents' trust fund to invest in crypto, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. He was also using his firm's accounts to facilitate payments for a company called Lucky 777. Stanford stood up weakly. Your Honor, Lucky 777 is a gaming consultant. I laughed, a cold, dry laugh. No, Mr. Stanford. Lucky 777 is an unlicensed online gambling syndicate operating out of a server farm in Costa Rica. It is illegal in the state of New York. I pointed to the diagram. Here is the flow of funds. Gamblers in New York would send money to Brad's shell company, Alpha Omega Consulting, disguised as consulting fees. Brad would then take a 10% cut as a processing fee. He would then wire the remaining 90% to the offshore accounts of Lucky 777. I looked at Brad. He wasn't just a bad investor. Your Honor, he was a payment processor for an illegal gambling ring. He was washing money. He was laundering millions of dollars of illicit proceeds through the American banking system. I produced a stack of emails. These are emails between Brad and the operators of Lucky 777. In them, they discuss how to structure the payments to avoid IRS detection. They discuss breaking the transfers down into amounts under $10,000. That is called structuring, and it is a federal crime punishable by up to 5 years in prison per count. I counted the emails. There are 52 counts here. Brad looked like he had stopped breathing. He was staring at the table, his hands gripping the edge so hard his knuckles were white. The judge looked at the evidence. He looked at the emails. He looked at the bank statements linking Brad directly to the Costa Rican servers. This court is taking a recess. The judge announced, his voice grave. I am forwarding these documents immediately to the district attorney's office. Mr. Sterling, I suggest you do not leave this building. The gavel banged. The room erupted. Reporters were sprinting for the doors to file their stories. Stanford grabbed my arm as I was packing up my files. Mrs. Sterling, wait, please. I turned to look at him. He was sweating. The arrogance was gone. He looked like a man trying to save his own license. Can we talk in the hallway? Just for a minute. I followed him out. Brad trailed behind like a whipped dog. Look, Audrey Stanford said, his voice hushed. This is bad. Really bad. If this goes to trial, Brad is looking at 20 years, minimum. I know, I said. I did the math. We want to make a deal, Stanford said. We will give you everything. The apartment, the car, half of the trust fund, whatever is left of it. We will sign the settlement today. Just don't send those emails to the DA. Please. We can handle this civilly. 50-50 split of all remaining assets. Brad looked at me, tears in his eyes. "Audrey, please. I am sorry. I was stupid. Don't send me to jail. I can't go to jail." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had laughed when I said I would represent myself. I looked at the man who had thrown my clothes in the hallway. I looked at the man who had given my grandmother's ring to his mistress. He wanted mercy. He wanted me to save him. I adjusted my blazer. "You offer me 50-50?" I asked. "Yes," Brad said. "Yes, anything you want." I smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "You don't have 50% to give, Brad. You don't have anything. The government is going to seize every single dollar you have touched. The apartment is proceeds of crime. The trust fund is evidence. You are bankrupt." I leaned in close. "And as for the emails I sent them to the FBI 3 days ago, Agent Miller is already waiting for you in the lobby." Brad's knees buckled. Stanford let out a curse word and turned away. "It is too late for a settlement, Brad," I whispered. "You wanted a war. You wanted to see who was smarter. Well, congratulations. You found out." I walked away. I walked down the marble hallway, the sound of my heels echoing like gunshots. Behind me, I heard the heavy doors of the elevator open. I heard voices. "Mr. Sterling, federal agents. You are under arrest." I didn't turn around. I didn't need to see it. I had imagined this moment for weeks. The golden child had finally fallen, and I was the one who pushed him. 3 weeks had passed since Brad was arrested in the hallway of the law firm. He was currently out on bail, having put up his parents' Hamptons estate as collateral. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 20 days. His expensive suit hung loosely on his frame, his hair was thinning, and he had a permanent tremor in his left hand. We were back in family court for the final hearing regarding the dissolution of the marriage. But the atmosphere was different now. The arrogance was gone. The gallery was packed with federal observers, not just reporters. Stanford Brad's lawyer looked defeated. He stood up to address Justice O'Connor. His voice lacked the booming theatricality of our first session. "Your Honor," Stanford said quietly, "my client is prepared to capitulate. Given the pending federal charges and the freezing of his assets, Mr. Sterling agrees to waive all claims to the marital estate. He agrees to grant Mrs. Sterling full ownership of the penthouse, the vehicle, and what remains of the retirement accounts. In exchange, we simply ask that Mrs. Sterling sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding any further business dealings she may have witnessed during the marriage. We want to close this chapter and allow my client to focus on his criminal defense." It sounded reasonable. To anyone else, it would have been a victory. I get the house, I get the money, I get the silence. But I wasn't interested in a reasonable outcome. I was interested in justice. And justice in my line of work is not quiet. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my dress. I looked at Brad. He refused to meet my eyes. He was staring at his shoes, probably praying that I would take the house and leave him alone. "Your Honor," I said, "I reject the settlement offer." A murmur went through the courtroom. Stanford looked up confused. "Mrs. Sterling," the judge said, "you are getting everything you asked for. Why would you reject it?" "Because, Your Honor, the settlement implies that this is a private matter between two spouses. It implies that the assets in question are Brad's to give. They are not." I walked to the center of the room. Mr. Sterling thinks he has lost. He thinks the worst is over because he spent a night in jail. He thinks he is facing a few years for tax evasion, maybe a plea deal that gets him out in 18 months. He thinks this is a tragedy of errors. I turned to face the gallery. But Mr. Sterling does not understand the timeline. He thinks this started when he served me divorce papers at Le Bernardin. He thinks I reacted to his betrayal. He thinks I am a woman scorned who got lucky with a few Google searches. I turned back to Brad. "But I didn't start investigating you 2 weeks ago, Brad. I started investigating you 3 months ago." Brad looked up, his brow furrowed. 3 months? But we were fine 3 months ago. I ignored him. "Your Honor, I would like to call a final witness to the stand. This witness is not on the original list, but given the nature of the settlement offer, her testimony is vital to determine the true ownership of the assets." I gestured to the back of the room. "I call Special Agent Sarah Jenkins of the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division." The double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. A woman in a sharp gray suit walked in. She was carrying a briefcase that looked heavy. She walked past the stunned spectators, past the trembling Brad, and took the stand. She took the oath. "Agent Jenkins," I said, "can you please tell the court why you are here today?" Agent Jenkins adjusted the microphone. "I am here to serve a formal notice of seizure regarding the assets of Bradley Sterling, Sterling Venture Capital, and the Sterling Legacy Trust. And on what basis are these assets being seized?" I asked. "On the basis of evidence provided to our office under the whistleblower program," she stated. I walked to my table and picked up the black binder. The same binder I had slammed onto the judge's desk on day one, the binder Brad thought was just a prop for divorce court. "Agent Jenkins," I said, holding up the binder, "do you recognize the contents of this file?" "Yes," Agent Jenkins said. "That is a duplicate of the master file known as Case Number 492. It contains detailed ledgers of money laundering, wire fraud, and securities fraud spanning 5 years. And when did your office receive this file?" I asked. Agent Jenkins checked her notes. "We received the initial digital submission on February 14th, Valentine's Day." The courtroom was silent. Brad's mouth fell open. February 14th. That was 3 months before he asked for a divorce. That was the day he bought me flowers and told me he loved me while secretly texting Jessica in the bathroom. That was the day I found a receipt for a diamond ring in his jacket pocket, a ring that wasn't for me. I didn't get mad that day. I got to work. I turned to the judge. "Your Honor, Brad thinks I am representing myself because I am poor. He thinks I am fighting for scraps. But the truth is, I haven't been fighting him. I have been processing him." I pointed at Brad. "I am not just the plaintiff, Your Honor. I am the whistleblower. I am informant number 492. I walked closer to Brad. The 200-page dossier I gave the court, I didn't compile that in a weekend. I spent 3 months undercover in my own marriage. I tracked every dollar. I recorded every phone call. I photocopied every document while you were sleeping, Brad." Brad looked like he was having a stroke. You knew the whole time," I smiled. It was a cold professional smile. "I knew about Jessica. I knew about the gambling. I knew about the theft from your parents. I knew everything. But I waited." "Do you know why I waited, Brad?" He shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "Because under the Dodd-Frank Act and the IRS whistleblower statute, the government requires a certain threshold of evidence to guarantee a conviction. I needed you to commit one more wire transfer to cross the $10 million mark. That bumped the case from a standard audit to a federal priority." I looked at Stanford. "So, Mr. Stanford, when you offer me the house and the cars, you are offering me property that already belongs to the United States government. It is all getting seized. It is all proceeds of crime." Stanford sat down, burying his face in his hands. But I continued, turning back to the judge. "There is one asset that is not getting seized." I looked at Agent Jenkins. "Agent, under the whistleblower guidelines, what is the standard reward for an informant who provides original information leading to the recovery of stolen tax revenue and sanctions exceeding $10 million? Agent Jenkins looked directly at Brad. "The statute provides for a mandatory award of between 15 and 30% of the total amount collected by the government. I did the mental math for the room. The total fraud is estimated at $22 million plus penalties plus interest. The government is going to recover roughly $30 million from the liquidation of Sterling VC and the personal assets of the Sterling family. 30% of $30 million is $9 million. I looked at Brad. "I don't want your settlement, Brad. I don't want the house. I don't want the used Porsche." I leaned in close so only he could hear the steel in my voice. "I am going to take my 30% cut from the government check. It is clean. It is tax-free. And it is completely untouchable by you or your lawyers." Brad stared at me. He finally understood. He hadn't just lost a divorce. He had been the subject of a federal sting operation run from his own kitchen table. I walked back to my seat and started packing my bag. "Your Honor, I withdraw my petition for asset division. I am happy to let the IRS handle the distribution." The plaintiff rests. The courtroom doors did not open for me to leave. They opened to admit 4 more federal agents. The judge banged his gavel, but nobody was looking at the bench anymore. All eyes were on Brad. Agent Jenkins, the IRS specialist who had just testified, pointed a finger at the defendant's table. Bradley Sterling, she announced, her voice cutting through the noise. You are under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit money laundering, and tax evasion. Brad stood up, knocking his chair over. No, he screamed. You can't do this. I am cooperating. I offered a settlement. Stanford, do something. Stanford, his high-priced lawyer, stepped away from him. In the legal world, that is the universal sign that you are radioactive. Stanford began packing his briefcase with frantic speed, desperate to distance himself from a client who had just been indicted in open court. 2 agents moved in. They didn't ask Brad to put his hands behind his back. They spun him around. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was loud. Click, click, click. It was the sound of a dynasty ending. Brad struggled. He was crying now, ugly, heaving sobs. Mom, Dad, help me. Don't let them take me. I turned to look at the front row. Robert and Patricia Sterling were standing clinging to each other. Their faces were masks of absolute horror, but it wasn't just the sight of their son in cuffs that terrified them. It was the realization of what Agent Jenkins had said about the money. Patricia lunged over the railing, grabbing Stanford's arm as he tried to scurry past. What did she mean? Patricia shrieked. What did that woman mean about the trust? Stanford shook her off. Mrs. Sterling, please let go. Where is our money? Robert bellowed, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. The retirement fund. The $12 million. Where is it? Stanford stopped. He looked at the parents with a mixture of pity and disgust. It is gone, Robert. Brad spent it. He gambled it away on crypto and fake consulting fees, and whatever was left has just been frozen by the federal government as proceeds of crime. You are broke. The word hung in the air. Broke. Patricia's legs gave out. She collapsed onto the wooden bench. No, she whispered. That is impossible. We have the Hamptons house. We have the artwork. Stanford shook his head. You put the Hamptons house up as collateral for Brad's bail 2 weeks ago. Since he just violated his bail conditions by getting arrested for new felonies, the court seizes the house. It belongs to the state now. Robert Sterling. The man who had looked down on me for 5 years suddenly looked very small. He looked at his son, who was being dragged toward the side exit by the marshals. You stole it, Robert whispered, his voice cracking. You stole everything. Brad didn't answer. He was too busy begging the agents not to ruin his suit. Then the realization hit them. They were elderly. They had no income. Their assets were gone. They were facing a legal battle they couldn't afford. They needed help. They needed someone who understood the system, someone who knew where the money went, someone who could navigate the IRS maze. Slowly, painfully, their heads turned toward me. I was standing by my table, calmly putting my files into my bag. I looked composed. I looked successful. I looked like the only lifeboat in the ocean they were drowning in. Patricia scrambled up. She ran toward the gate that separated the gallery from the court floor. Audrey, she cried out. Audrey, wait! I stopped. I didn't turn fully. I just gave her a side profile view. Audrey, please, Patricia stammered, tears ruining her expensive makeup. You know the accounts. You know the numbers. You have to help us. We didn't know. We are victims too. You can talk to the agents. You can tell them to release our pension. We are family. Robert joined her. Audrey, be reasonable. We are old people. You can't let us end up on the street. You are the expert. You fix the books for the FBI. Fix this for us. We will pay you. We will make it right. I turned around slowly. I looked at Patricia, the woman who had put tape on my grandmother's clock. I looked at Robert, the man who had tried to bribe me with $50,000 to commit perjury. They looked pathetic, but pity is a luxury I could no longer afford. I walked over to the railing. I stood just out of their reach. You want to hire me? I asked. Yes. Yes, Robert said, nodding frantically. We need a forensic accountant. We need you. I adjusted my glasses. I looked them up and down. My consulting rate for private clients is $1,000 an hour, I said calmly. Robert blinked. That is steep. But fine, we will pay it, once we get the money back. I shook my head. I require a $50,000 retainer up front. Cash. They stared at me. They didn't have $50, let alone $50,000. And besides, I continued, my voice dropping to a whisper that only they could hear. I have a strict policy regarding my client list. What policy? Patricia asked, trembling. I smiled. The same smile I had worn when I walked out of their library 3 weeks ago. I don't accept clients with low ethical scores. I turned my back on them. Audrey, Robert shouted, "You can't leave us like this. We are your family." I stopped at the doors. "No, Robert, you made it very clear that I was never family. I was just the help, and the help has just quit." I walked out of the courtroom. Behind me, I heard Patricia start to scream, a primal sound of a woman realizing that the castle walls hadn't just been breached, they had ceased to exist. I walked down the courthouse steps into the bright afternoon sun. The air tasted sweet. It tasted like freedom, and it tasted like 30% of $30 million. 2 months later, the dust had finally settled. Brad pleaded guilty. He didn't have a choice. The evidence I provided was bulletproof. There was no trial, just a sentencing hearing. He stood before the judge in an orange jumpsuit. He had lost 20 pounds. He looked like a ghost. The judge was not lenient. The sheer scale of the fraud, combined with the elder abuse of his parents, made him an unsympathetic defendant. Bradley Sterling, the judge said, "You are sentenced to 84 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You are also ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $12 million. 7 years. He would be 41 when he got out. He would have no license, no reputation, and a criminal record that would follow him forever." As the bailiffs led him away, he looked into the gallery. He was looking for someone specific. He wasn't looking for me. He was looking for Jessica. He expected her to be there. He expected her to wait for him. After all, he had stolen a diamond ring for her. He had destroyed his life for her. But the seat was empty. Jessica hadn't come to the sentencing. In fact, Jessica had made her own moves. The moment the news of the bankruptcy hit, Jessica realized the sugar daddy train had derailed. She didn't just leave him, she turned on him. She gave an exclusive interview to a tabloid magazine titled, "I Was a Victim of His Lies Too." She claimed she didn't know the money was stolen. She claimed Brad manipulated her. She even handed over the keys to the Soho apartment to the feds voluntarily to avoid being charged as an accessory. She was currently dating a hedge fund manager in Miami. Brad was a distant memory, a stepping stone she had tripped over. As for Sterling Venture Capital, it was dissolved. The office furniture was auctioned off. The logo was scraped off the glass doors. It was as if it had never existed. I sat in my new office watching the news report on a muted television. The headline read, "Venture Capital Scion Sentenced. Whistleblower Awarded Record Sum." I took a sip of my coffee. My phone rang. It was Nia. "Hey," she said. Her voice sounded lighter, happier. "Hey," I replied. "How are they?" "They are moving into a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens today," Nia said. "Robert is crying about the square footage. Patricia is complaining about the smell of the hallway, but they have a roof over their heads. My husband is paying the rent." "You are a saint, Nia," I said. "No," she laughed. "I am just keeping them far enough away so they don't infect my life, but close enough that I can watch them learn humility. It is a process." "And you?" she asked. I looked around my office. I looked at the framed photo of Barnaby on my desk. I looked at the check from the U.S. Treasury that was sitting in my drawer. "I am good, Nia. I am really good." I hung up the phone. I didn't destroy Brad because I hated him. I destroyed him because he tried to erase me. He thought I was a line item in his budget that he could just delete. He forgot that every audit ends with a balance sheet, and in the end, everything balances out. He got 0, and I got everything. 6 months after the sentencing, the United States government finally processed the paperwork. Federal bureaucracy is slow, but when it moves with absolute precision. I was sitting in my temporary rental apartment when the mail arrived. There was a single stiff envelope from the Department of the Treasury. I sat at my kitchen table and used a letter opener to slice the top. Inside was a check. It was green, official, and beautiful. The Internal Revenue Code section, 7623 is a fascinating piece of legislation. It states that a whistleblower who provides specific and credible information leading to the collection of proceeds from tax evasion is entitled to an award of between 15 and 30% of the collected amount. Because the information I provided was so comprehensive, and because I had essentially handed them the case on a silver platter with ribbons on it, the IRS granted me the maximum award percentage. Brad, his parents, and his sham companies were forced to liquidate everything to pay back the $22 million they owed in back taxes, penalties, and interest. I looked at the number on the check in my hand, $3,240,000. I ran my thumb over the raised ink. This wasn't money from a divorce settlement. It wasn't alimony. It wasn't a gift. It was earned income. It was my commission for cleaning up the mess that the Sterling family had made of the American tax system. I thought back to the library in the Hamptons. I thought about Robert Sterling sliding that check for $50,000 across the desk, telling me to take it and disappear. He had looked at me with such pity. He thought he was being generous. I laughed. It was a genuine, full-throated laugh that echoed in the empty apartment. They had tried to buy my integrity for $50,000. Instead, their greed had paid me $3.2 million. I deposited the check that afternoon. I walked into the bank wearing jeans and a t-shirt. The teller looked at the check, then looked at me, then looked at the check again. She called the manager. The manager came over, verified the funds, and shook my hand with a look of awe. I walked out of the bank with financial freedom. I was 31 years old, I had zero debt, and I had enough capital to do whatever I wanted for the rest of my life. But I didn't want to retire. I didn't want to go sit on a beach and drink margaritas. Brad had called me boring. He had called me stagnant. He was wrong. I was just getting started. The first thing I did with the money was settle a score, not for me, but for the only person in that family who deserved a break. The Sterling estate in the Hamptons had been seized by the government. It was put up for a foreclosure auction to satisfy the remaining debts of Robert and Patricia. Usually these auctions are swarmed by developers looking to tear the house down and build something modern. I attended the auction. I stood in the back wearing oversized sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat. The bidding started low. The house was tainted. Everyone knew it was the site of a federal raid. The developers were hesitant. I waited until the bidding stalled. Then I raised my paddle. $1.5 million, I said. Going once, going twice. Sold. I bought the house where Patricia had forced Nia to wash dishes. I bought the house where Robert had plotted to hide his assets. A week later, I called Nia. "Meet me at the house," I said. "I have some old things to clear out." Nia arrived looking nervous. She walked up the crushed stone driveway. I was standing on the porch holding a set of keys. "Why are we here, Audrey?" she asked. "I hate this place." "I know," I said. I hated it too. It felt like a prison. I walked down the steps and took her hand. I pressed the keys into her palm. "That is why I bought it," I said. Nia stared at me. You bought it." "Why, I bought it so I could sell it," I replied. I pulled a contract out of my bag. "I am selling this property to Dr. Nia Sterling and her husband for the sum of $1. Nia dropped the keys. "Audrey." "No, I can't. This is $1 million asset." "It is a house, Nia," I said. "It is just wood and stone. But now it is yours. You can burn it down, you can sell it, or you can live in it and raise your children here and make sure that no one ever treats them the way we were treated. You can rewrite the history of this place." Nia started to cry. She pulled me into a hug, squeezing me so tight I could barely breathe. "Thank you," she sobbed. "I didn't do it for charity. I did it because Nia was the one who gave me the clue about the trust fund. Without her, I never would have found the money. This was just her commission." A month later, I opened the doors to my new office in Midtown Manhattan. It wasn't a hidden cubicle in a back room anymore. It was a corner office with a view of the park. On the glass door, etched in silver frosting, were the words Audrey and Associates, Forensic Accounting and Financial Justice. I didn't have to advertise. The news of the Sterling case had spread through the legal community like wildfire. Every divorce lawyer in the city knew my name. They knew that if a husband was hiding money, I was the bloodhound who would find it. I hired a small team. 3 young women, all brilliant with numbers, all overlooked by the big firms because they didn't fit the corporate mold. I paid them double the market rate. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, I was sitting at my desk reviewing a file on a tech CEO who was trying to hide stock options in a crypto wallet. My phone rang. It was the direct line. I picked it up. Audrey Sterling speaking. There was silence on the other end, then a jagged intake of breath. "Hello," the voice said. It was a woman. She sounded terrified. She sounded exhausted. She sounded exactly like I did 6 months ago. "I am sorry to bother you," the woman whispered. "My name is Sarah. I don't know if you can help me. I read about you in the paper." "Take your time, Sarah," I said gently. "Tell me what is happening." "It is my husband," she said, her voice cracking. "He is a partner at a law firm. He filed for divorce yesterday. He canceled my credit cards. He told me that if I try to fight him, he will bury me." I closed the file on my desk. I swiveled my chair to look out at the city skyline. "He said I am crazy," Sarah continued, sobbing now. "He said I have no skills. He said I am too poor to hire a lawyer. He said I will never see a dime." I felt a familiar spark ignite in my chest. It was the same cold, hard anger that had fueled me in the dark when my power was cut. But this time, I wasn't alone, and neither was she. "Sarah," I said, my voice steady and strong, "listen to me very carefully. Your husband is lying. He is banking on your fear. He thinks you are helpless." I picked up my pen. But he made a mistake, Sarah. He forgot that every lie leaves a paper trail. "I can't afford you," she wept. "I have nothing." "Don't worry about the money," I said, smiling at the memory of my own beginning. "We will get the money from him." I pulled a fresh legal pad toward me. "Now stop crying, wipe your eyes, and tell me about the numbers." The story of Audrey Sterling teaches us a profound lesson about the danger of underestimating the quiet observer. For years, Brad and his family mistook Audrey's silence for submission, and her frugality for a lack of ambition. They believed that power belonged to those who shouted the loudest, flashed the most wealth, and bullied those beneath them. They were fatally wrong. True power does not lie in arrogance or status. It lies in competence, preparation, and the patience to wait for the right moment to strike. Audrey proves that in a world filled with noise and posturing, the most lethal weapon is the truth backed by cold, hard data. She didn't win her freedom through screaming matches or petty drama. She won by knowing the numbers better than the people who claim to own them. Furthermore, her journey highlights the critical importance of financial literacy and independence. Audrey's ability to navigate the complex world of forensic accounting wasn't just a career, it was her shield and her sword. It serves as a reminder that we must never hand over the keys to our life or our finances to anyone else, regardless of trust. When betrayal comes, emotions will not save you, but receipts will. The ultimate revenge wasn't seeing Brad in handcuffs. It was the realization that Audrey never needed the Sterling name to be valuable. She was a powerhouse all along, simply waiting for the audit to begin. If you have ever had to silently gather your own receipts to protect yourself from a toxic person who underestimated you, let me know your story in the comments below. I read every single one.